as you can see, I have another ARC5 power supply, or a BC454, 455, 453 power supply ready. Now, this is how you do it. There's your connector down in the bottom, and the transformers are leaning out. Makes it very easy to wire up the connectors. Okay, and you could also wire everything off on the bench separate from the case, figure it all out, and then drop it in as an assembly, and then bolt everything in place. See, these transformers come up like this. Okay, this center tap wire is not used on this one because this transformer is a 20 volt AC input, which will give me, I have a little bit more 24 going into it, so it should give me more than 110 out AC. That it also will go off to the rectifier, capacitor, and resistor. Okay, and just if you just fell into this video, this is the third one I built. Here's a completed one. Okay, and they just set right down on, it just sets right down on top of the command radio, like this. There's a command radio chassis. Let's make sure we're in the frame, and we just set it down, and it'll find its way. Okay, and my supply design is similar to a unit that someone sold out of the back of a magazine, but mine differs. Mine uses a 24 volt transformer, which lights the filaments of the tubes, because you got 3 series strings of 12 volt tubes, and the radio wants to see 24 to 28 volts to light the tubes. Then you need high voltage for the tubes for the plate. Now, the original box was bigger than mine. It wasn't isolated from ground. They used the AC through a selenium diode as the high voltage, and it's very dangerous to do that. Now, this unit is very safe, but if you were to take one of these, one of my power supplies, and stick it on a radio that hasn't been checked out, it's possible you could burn out the high voltage side. If the capacitors, there are capacitors in the RC radios that become leaky, and they're right around the high voltage line. And if you plug a good power supply onto them, you might pop the capacitor out. In this case, you'd probably take out the winding in this transformer. But this is how I did it, and I've showed you in the other videos the connector. And I want to say again, the reason I used 2 separate transformers. Now let me remember the reasons. First of all, 2 separate transformers are smaller, cheaper than 1 transformer. Okay, and the way I did it was I used a larger transformer to light the tubes, and then a smaller one in reverse to get the high voltage, and that allows me to have room for the power supply. All right, and the other thing that's different than my supply is I use a 24 volt transformer, which feeds the tubes. You don't have to rewire the radio. See, people don't get what a command radio is when you buy one. You buy it, you get it home, and you realize, first step, you need a power supply if you want to go that route. Now you turn it on, and now you're going to have to recap the capacitors, because most of them go bad. They're in these little flower pot type capacitor units, and you grind the top off very gently. You go around the top and grind, and this little ring will pop off, and then you pry up the mica board and cut the wires, and then you heat the capacitor up, and the beeswax comes out, and you refill the capacitor unit with new capacitors and seal it back up with epoxy or contact cement. So the radio will look original. But people buy these radios, and then they realize they need a power supply. They need to be recapped. I showed everybody everything. in a bunch of videos. I had a bunch of videos up there, but I had people complaining to me, you know, that I mumble when I talk. But here's a knob you're going to need, okay? Now, if you buy a radio, how are you going to tune the radio? All right, now this is ice maker tubing. In here is a piece of 1/4-20 shaft, aluminum shaft. And if you look over at this radio here, you can see that when I'm working with them, this is just a piece of ice maker tubing, and it fits in there nice and tight, and you can at least tune the radio. So that's one of the problems done. Okay, then some of the radios, you don't have the volume control, earphone, and switch for the BFO. This is a switch to turn the BFO on and off. This is a gain control. It's not a volume control, it's a gain control. It controls the gain of the front end of the radio. And in operation, when the airplanes are flying next to each other, they turn the front end gain back. They're so close to each other during operation that if they only had a volume control, the front end of the radio would overload and they wouldn't be able to hear each other. They had plenty of volume and they could adjust the volume, but the radio would be distorted. So this is a gain control. It controls the front end amplifiers and I think one IF. And then you have to also have a jack for your speaker. Okay, now in my case, you can see it back there, that cigar box. All right, and in that cigar box, there it is back here. This cigar box has a filament transformer in there. You put the filament transformer towards the radio, the high end, which normally goes to the AC. That goes out to the radio through a connector. Okay, you can use a miniature connector or you can use a 1/4 inch. And then the low end, which is normally like a 6.3 or 12.6, that goes to the speaker. So you can make an impedance matcher speaker unit without touching the radio. See, a lot of the articles, they had you rewire the filaments. They had you gut the audio output transformer out of the radio. It doesn't need to be done. You can leave the radio original and still make it work. And you know, I had this thing where I wanted a supply that just, it's really messy here because I'm really in the middle of building stuff. But in other words, I can move this between radios. Now I got 3 of them. In other words, you just set it down and it drops in place. All right, and that's if you really get into these radios, you want to build yourself a nice supply. And I'm just moments away from locating the hole to mount this in down in here after I bring these up. See, even though I built 3 of these, I still put them together the same way because this transformer, the same company, over the years it's gotten thinner. So if you get one of the older transformers, it's a little fatter, so it has to be mounted a little bit more in from the edge. You gotta be very careful, especially like I told you in my last videos. I built this case using the Harbor Freight bending jig, and then here's the lid. Here's the lid. I have built 1 lid so far, but we're still experimenting. But the power supply is finished. Okay, the whole design, it works great. Very little hum, and that's the thing you're going to run across. I see the command radios for sale on eBay, and I'm like saying, there is another sucker just bought it, and it's going to be a keepsake. You're going to get it, and then you can open it up, and then you can start reading, and it's going to be mumbo jumbo for you, because you basically have to know how an AA5 radio works, which is an All-American 5, which is that's what AA5 stands for, All-American 5. It's like a kitchen radio. Years ago, the older ones used the metal tubes. We had them in tech school, and once you know the AA5, this radio is a piece of cake. The only difference is this has a front end that's tuned. It tunes the aerial. A cheap AA5, they just have a loop antenna on the back of the radio. They don't get that carried away. But there's a lot involved in getting an AA5 radio operating. You know, we won't even go to the fact that you could have one where the tuning capacitor is frozen, and then you got to take it all apart and put penetrating oil down into the tuning cap. And I see a lot of the command radios on eBay, and I look at them, and I look at them really carefully if they were bodged, screwed with, and they're up there. The ones that have on the back in this power supply section, you'll see a tube mounted, and the transformer might be missing. And there was a big honking transformer that some people put on the back of this unit, and I think the tube is probably a dual diode tube, and they hang the capacitor up underneath inside the box for the radio. Inside the box for the radio, inside here. There's many ways to work this radio, but my goal is to keep the radio original, just like it was when it was in the aircraft. And I take the capacitors apart, and I put new capacitors in there, and then I close it up. And you know, when I take my knob off the radio, it's still the original. The radio is still original. You can slap on the cable that runs the radio. There's a remote cable that you can that'll run. It fits on here just like a speedometer cable, and you can tune the radio from 3 feet away. All right. When I'm done with a radio, it can be made original real fast. Now, in the case of here, I have this unit here, and this plate looks identical to the real ones. I bent it myself. I made one, and all my radios have been standardized. All right. I don't know if you could. Let's see if it's enough lighting in here. Yeah. Okay. In other words, one of these is a regenerative control. Read up on it. But I can turn this radio back original in a matter of minutes. Okay. If somebody wanted it lightweight. But it's all up to you what you want to do with the radio. But you got to have a power supply. And if you saw my other videos, I showed you several ways to make the supply. The problem is the radio is bigger. The supply is bigger than the radio. That's why I went to this. You know, I basically have 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. But if you really think it out, it can be done. Okay, and I showed you in several videos this thing, what's inside, even like now, showing you, you know, that's how you could get in there and solder your wire. Also, you could take this whole thing out and solder it all up, and then slide it, even the switch, slide it all back in as like a wiring harness, and slide it in there and put your bolts in. Okay, and it's up to you how far you're going to go with the radio. But I'm going to tell you, 99% of you guys are just going to watch these videos and then realize you're in over your head. And what's really bad is when I'm bidding on one of these radios, I just know the person that outbids me is never going to do anything with the radio. And I've got most of the different models, and I've got them all working. And you know, I went to tech school, and the AA5 was which is All American 5 radio. That's what we had to work on. And they had these metal tubes. And my dad had a TV repair shop. I've gone to tech school. I've taken these tubes apart. I know how to make a socket out of them. I know how to make you drill a hole in the back of here. After you take it apart, you can make this into a plug jack for a power supply for a phonograph. There's so many things once you understand and spend years in something. But this hobby is dying because all us old timers are dying off. And the younger kids, I don't blame you. You try to get parts. Like this transformer right here. Took 2 weeks to get to my house. It was $12.95 with shipping. All right, and I bought a second one because this one didn't show up, and the second one showed up the same day this one showed up. And yeah, every part you order, it could take 2 weeks to get it. It's just like the old days when you send away to Lafayette or not Night Kit. I forget the name of the one company. You'd send away, and sometimes you wait 4 weeks, you get a letter telling you they couldn't fill your order. Please try later. And you're like, what the hell? I waited 4 weeks. You know, but that's the way it used to be. Now it's getting just as funky. And a lot of these transformers are getting very expensive, you know. But the difference in my power supply that fits on the back compared to the one that originally was made for it by a company in the back of a magazine is I use a 24-volt transformer. So I don't have to go in and rewire the heaters, because there's articles on that. You're like, why did they rewire the heater windings? Why didn't they just use a 24-volt transformer? Who knows? Okay, this is the stuff when you get really good, you look at why did they do it that way. You know, they have you take a transformer out of the radio, and then put a one in that goes from like, let's say 20K down to 8 ohms. When really they have a 20K to 150 ohm transformer. If you move the tap in there for headphones, or you could go with a filament transformer in your speaker unit and impedance match it that way, and then you don't have to gut the radio. But there's some really bad articles, and one of them has you gut the BFO. And I saw that, I'm like, why would you take the BFO out of the radio? How are you going to copy code? But there's some really bad articles, and I can't make them disappear. And I think that's about it. You know, I show you as much as I can. I tell you as much as I can. And for a guy that knows electronics, this is going to be a piece of cake. You know, maybe you'll have some bending problems, you know. And then there are power supplies up on the internet where for the high voltage section, he uses a switching supply, but it's off to the side. My power supply sits on the back of the radio. The only thing you got is an extension speaker if you don't use headphones. But if you use headphones, my radio, the way I got it, is totally complete. I think that's it. All right, that's it.